Today, I had the honor of talking to Mr. Subhash Garg, the former Secretary of Finance and Economic Affairs of India. Mr. Garg is a luminary in public policy and has held several key positions in the Union Government of India, Government of Rajasthan, and has also served as the Executive Director in the World Bank from 2014 to 2017. Mr. Garg recently launched a phenomenal book called The $10 Trillion Dream. This book provides a wide-angled and comprehensive picture of the state of the Indian economy and has several recommendations to help guide India to achieving the $10 trillion dream. This episode is information dense and it is guaranteed to augment your knowledge base by leaps and bounds. And now my conversation with Mr. Subhash Garg. So you start the book on a powerful note, highlighting three overarching insights which you garner through reflecting on the lessons that you collected during your long intellectual experience in public service. Could you please shed some light on these three insights that you gathered about the Indian economy during this journey?
So thank you, Prarthana, for inviting me to this platform. I served in the Indian Administrative Service for about 36 years. It was a very rich experience, I must say, serving all over from the sort of subdivisional district level to the World Bank, government of Rajasthan to the government of India. The advantage of being an IAS officer is that you're not a specialist, you're not into one single area. You get the opportunity to serve in so many facets of life. And then you can see a much wider sort of the economy, the human relations, the way things work. Intersections of politics and the economy, the intersections of human sort of emotions, interest with the economy, and so and the kind of exposure you get in different departments and ministries. So I worked ranging from education to power to transport to policy making in finance, elsewhere. So I think that shaped me, and fortunately, I have always been inquisitive. So I always try to understand the basics and the roots of wherever I was working for whatever time, and try to figure out, number one, what that sort of station in life is, what is that vocation, and then also integrated with the larger picture. I think that made me realize what I also recount in the book, the three key insights. Number one, to my mind, the economy is nothing more than the aggregate of production of all goods and services. Right. Its distribution from the producer to the consumers. And finally, it's consumer and its consumption. And this is a cyclical process which goes on all the time in the world, everywhere, whether you're working in villages, in agriculture, or whether you're working in industries or more sophisticated technological things, or in government or elsewhere. So finally, the economy is essentially the whole process and cycle of production of goods and services, distribution thereof, and consumption. This is measured not very perfectly, but very satisfactorily and as best as we can in the form of the GDP, or what we call gross development product. That is a very powerful concept, and that's a very good concept, because GDP, in a way, in one dimension, not only captures the entire value of the production of goods and services, but it also equals the total income in the society, right? Which is then shared by the three major constituents: the labor, the capital, and the government. The taxes come only from the GDP. If there is no GDP, there is no tax. income which the government. So GDP is then, and then it also on the expenditure side is what is consumed and what is invested or exported to the rest of the world. So GDP is a very, very important concept and very essential. So that's, I think, was the realization or my first insight. The second thing which I realized that in the ultimate analysis, it's the human resource and the capital, which is the primary factors of production. The human resources, they have two sort of God-given or natural qualities. One is that they have physical power in their muscles and in their bodies, which make them worthy or which they may make them fit for doing work. Whether you do it in agriculture, industry, or anywhere, the body and the muscle which everyone has is the primary human asset to make somebody good enough to work. And secondly, that you have a brain. The brain has neurons, brain has power to sort of learn, store, disseminate, use. And that intelligence in the brain is the second most powerful human resource to say. And this combination of physical and the intellectual or the muscles and the intelligence is what makes human productive and make them contribute to the work. If somebody is unfortunately not having that kind of endowment, if you're physically handicapped or something, it might be impaired. But otherwise, that is what is the crucial means for any human being to make or live a dignified life by being able to produce and add value. So that is the one aspect of the second insight. And second is that capital is what contributes to or what assembles the human resources, what assembles the technology, and then lead to the production of goods and services. And capital has been changing its sort of shape from time to time. In the agricultural society, it was the land which was the primary capital, so to say. As you came to the industry, then the machines became the primary sort of capital, and machines were housed in buildings, and the product was also stored and transacted in buildings. So the machines and buildings became the primary capital in the industrial society. As we move along now to the digital society or digital economy, what we commonly call technology or this information technology or the ability to process data and produce goods, more services by or assets by sort of manipulating and using data is the primary asset. So technology today, not building, you can produce today most of the things in cyberspace, and therefore in the digital economy, the use of land and building and machines for that matter is also reducing. There is an element of machine which is required, and there is also some buildings which are required, but their relative contribution is much smaller. So that's the second insight which I thought is very important, the human resource and the capital contributing to the production. Last thing, if I may say, which I think is a little bit new in the literature. You don't find this kind of insight being presented by the authors, is the role of policy. So there is a lot of literature available about the factors of production, their productivity, and whole lot of things, capital, labor separately. But in my judgment, what I learned is and experience is that the policy plays an enormous role. If India decided to go a socialist way, or Russia, China decided to adopt communist system as a policy, as opposed to somebody else choosing a capitalist pattern of society, or a more capitalist oriented socialist pattern of society, or whether you allow the private sector to work or not work, or for that matter, even today, if you want data to be localized, or you give more sort of importance to the privacy or the localization concern than the business use of data, the kind of policy you make makes so much of a difference. So I have elevated in my book the policy to be the third basic building block of the economy. So I think these are my take based on my observations and experience, that these are the three insights.
Brilliantly put. GDP, HR plus capital, that's the human and artificial intelligence component of it, and also the role of policy, brilliantly explained. And now, if I may, let's actually dive right into your book. You speak about the importance of the expansion of the private sector enterprise to bolster the financial and banking sectors of the country. You explain how the transformation of the public sector financial system into a private one will be one of the biggest drivers of the financial reforms agenda and is absolutely essential to achieve the $10 trillion target. Could you elaborate on the thought process behind this?
So, Prarthana, I think the wave of socialism and the communism post Karl Marx, who actually observed the very downside of the industrial revolution affecting the labor very badly. Well, at that stage, the labor was made to work like not human beings, so to say. And that was a reaction that this system is very unfair. But if you look at the root of the whole thing, the production of goods and services, which I talked about, and which is what the economy is, has always been and would always be, to my mind, done in the private sector. The government's job is not to produce goods and services which are consumed. The government has been created by the society. That social contract which is there between society and government is to provide the public goods and services. And that is what the government is designed for. So if we have security concerns, if we have defense, we have law and order, we have macroeconomic stability, we need to take care of the judicial system. People need to be sort of provided a fair administration, impartial administration. People have to be sort of provided a good pollution-free climate, rivers, lakes, everything should be cleaned. The roads should be, so these are all public goods and services. And there is a very large ask and requirement which the government need to do it. The government is not a very efficient producer of private goods. You take anything, whether you take steel, cement, or textile, or for that matter, production of financial services or banking or whatever. So all these are the private goods which are consumed by private people and which are produced by private people, right? And that is where my sort of argument in the book is that these are best organized if they are organized to be produced in the private sector. And a financial system is a part of the larger real economy. And so the argument which applies for the real economy to be sort of developed and thrive in the private sector also applies for the financial sector. So whether it's banking or insurance or asset management or now in times to come, the decentralized finance and things like that are best done in the private sector. We have seen this result in India. So after, let us say, the banks were nationalized in 1969 and 1980, the banking performance, the function of the banking to intermediate between the savers and the businessmen or the industry sort of suffered. The savings were then diverted towards loan melas and many other things which were happening, and not towards the best, or they were not allocated to the best use or best productive use. And as soon as this realization, it didn't take much time, from 72 to 92, when the government started licensing this to the private businesses again, or private banks again, the things changed again for the better. And therefore, and the experience in India of the private banking is very, very much to see. Even if you see the recent performance, we still have a very large public sector. If you look at the recent most results also, the overall growth of credit in the economy is, let us say, about 9%. But the private banks are clocking credit between 18 to 24%, whereas the public sector banks have much smaller growth in the credit. And that credit is also not going towards business and industry. That credit is going to more of retail, which is important. Retail and all, but the primary function of credit is to go and fund the business and industry. That's not what is happening. Same will apply to insurance industry, whether it's general insurance or the life insurance. So I think it makes a lot of sense if we do this transformation. One of the transformation I talk about in this book is to transform the public sector into private sector, wherever the public sector is producing goods and services, or the private goods and services. And as part of that transformation, I think there is every case we will gain enormously. The productivity will rise, the growth will be much more if we are able to privatize the banking, insurance, and other financial industry.
Got it. And I want to double click on something you said, specifically the role of our government in society. Now let's delve into the role of governmental agencies in the financial world. You alluded to this in your response, but I want to dig a bit deeper into this. There has been a rise of an alternate version of reality in the financial world with the rise of decentralized finance.
Right.
So what is your view on the influence that decentralized finance would have on the operations of traditional institutions like central bank?
So, see, the world is in the midst of digital transformation right now for last 30, 40 years. And everything is getting transformed, or much of the economy in the society is getting transformed into a digital economy. Much of that has been accomplished by what we know as centralized database technologies. So a central bank issues money, which is centrally managed and controlled. The banks are there as central database institutions. They have the data, or they all deposits, loans, etc. They control the access and determine the usage of this and that system, or whether you go to asset management. So the dematerialized stocks, bonds are kept by the dematerialized depositories, and then the transactions take place. So a lot of good has been done in terms of digital transformation by the centralized database technologies. However, in last few years, what we have seen is a new storm coming. Right. A very creative, productive storm which is coming, and this is as different as chalk and cheese is. That instead of centralized database technologies, you upturn the entire system, and you have a completely decentralized system. There is no central bank, there are no central bank, there are no banks, there are no depositories. There are no government institutions managing land, other assets and all. And here is a system where all those who own asset or who are into that business kind of thing arrive at a system where the data, all transactions are recorded in blocks, but all of them transactions are sort of verified and accepted in a consensual manner by all of the participants, or a fixed number of nodes and others acting for for all, but that's large enough to be called decentralized. And that system, in the first instance, looks dangerous. That it is, there is no regulator, there is no centralized authority. Who is going to discipline? Who is going to set rules? And who can you trust, etc. But the way it has sort of developed and actually acted in the world is that proves to be a far more transparent, far more consultative, far more collaborative, and also technically far more efficient. Right. So I think the decentralized database technologies are going to give a good run for the money to the centralized database technologies. Of course, the physical technologies have no match for them. And in times to come, the decentralized database technologies, the systems which are getting created, where you can almost do everything, whether it's production of services like decentralized finance or organizing assets in the form of NFTs, etc. I think this is going to stay, and this is going to overtake much more than what we can see today. And therefore, any country or any system which adopts policies in favor of or favoring this new animal on the rampage, so to say, will perhaps be better off than those who try to sort of restrain it or jail it or put it behind bars.
Right. I think this is the similar kind of, opposition or resistance that we saw during the tech boom in the 90s. And now everyone who did not adopt and did not jump on the bandwagon are left behind. Those companies which didn't innovate and kind of integrate the kind of infrastructure required to take on this have been left behind because of this fast technological revolution. And
very rightly said, Prarthana, this has always been happening. So you recounted very rightly the recent technological boom in 90s and early part of this century. But when industrial revolution was also coming in, the automation was coming in, the machines, automobiles were coming in, there was great resistance. In fact, India was late in adopting the industrial revolution. We were fighting with when the cloth was being produced more efficiently and in a much better fashion in the mills. By using the newly evolved technologies, we were fighting for a continuation of the hand produced kind of thing. Those might be emotionally good, they might appeal us, that's fine, but for clothing the people, the masses, this was a much better. Same thing was automobiles versus bullock carts, etc. So every now and then, the beauty is that in agricultural revolution, which lasted for about 10,000 years plus, the change was much smaller. The industrial revolution, which lasted for about 200, 250 years, the change was more rapid, but still, but what is coming in now in the digital is a simple storm. It's much faster, and therefore we have to act much faster.
Right. Beautifully wrapped up about decentralized finance. But I think this gives a good segue to talk about what India has jumped on really, head on. That is how it's nicely transitioning from being primarily a cash-based economy to one that is becoming reliant on digital payment systems. The percolation of UPI-based payment has been phenomenal, and this has brought about financial inclusion and transparency in the country. But one issue that this raises is it raises the fragility of the system to security threats. So what are your thoughts about this?
So see, we talked about the centralized database technologies doing phenomenally good work in digital transformation. The digital payments are part of that larger process. So in the digital payment space, what you referred as UPI and other like IMPS and NEFT and other technologies, mostly UPI because which has now permeated with hundreds of crores of transactions taking place every month. What does that do is that what we brilliantly did in India is that we could combine the banks, all the banks, not leaving behind anyone, all the banks into literally one single digital bank.
Right.
So the NPCI, the NPCI, which administers the National Payment Council of India, which runs the UPI system, so to say, has brought all the banks which have digital data of the deposits and with them into one little digital bank. So if you have one bank, then the payment becomes very easy. Because what you need to do is by signaling that payment from my account, deposit account may be transferred to the deposit account of somebody else. And the central agency, which is holding all the data, whenever it gets that message, it becomes so easy. It's far more efficient than the global SWIFT system is. The SWIFT system works in a very inefficient way because not that system is inefficient, but because the data is not organized, the systems are not same, they don't talk to each other, and there are different currencies and other things are operating. And therefore, UPI has done this very brilliantly and so easy and so efficient and so instantaneous, so to say, that you don't require any specialized knowledge of banking or finance to be able to transact. It's like as easy as if you want to watch a TV, you just sort of press the button to put the television on. Likewise, if you want to make a transfer, you just go to UPI, type in the number you want to send it, and indicate the amount, and lo, this is gone, right? It's so that is what explains the success. Now, your concern about the fragility of it, I don't think there is any fragility concerns about this. I don't think there are any instances of the wrong credits being done or the UPI transactions being hacked or something. By the way, cash is also as vulnerable to being misused, or theft might take place, or somebody may extort. So that is true of any kind of money, whether you operate in a gold system or you operate in a cash system or you operate in a database kind of banking system. So this is not unduly large. So I'm not worried about any concerns on that. And the fact that everybody is adopting this, including the poor who make very small transactions, suggests to me that this is going on very fine. What actually it should worry about now is the next stage, what we talked about a little while earlier, as the decentralized technology is coming in and making the banking probably a little irrelevant as an intermediator. So visualize a situation where cash or digital cash is held by everyone direct in their wallets, digital wallets, and then they are able to transfer from one digital wallet to another digital wallet without the need to go through the centralized banking system through UPI. It's difficult at this, the technology is not that evolved, It might work for the larger payments. The decentralized database technologies or the bitcoins, etc., are the private currencies which have problems regarding their valuations, their stability, etc. But imagine if tomorrow the dollar were to become a digital dollar. And if they adopt, I'm not saying that they are likely to adopt, if they adopt the decentralized mode and they say goodbye to the Fed, which they are unlikely to do, but if they adopt a system where there is an official dollar available digitally to everyone in the world with as digital dollar, then what happens today in UPI can happen much more efficiently in the system, and the global payment system can be transformed by everybody using the digital dollar for transferring money and receiving money. So I think the danger to be watched out for the digital payments industry is how the decentralized currency or the cryptocurrencies, blockchain cryptography-based currencies, as they become official or they become pseudo-officials like stable coins, they become stable coins. Stable coins can serve the same purpose without any worries about their valuations or the stability of value. And I think the threat would come. So I sometimes see that the global remittances industry today, which works on the SWIFTs and the UPIs and others, as far as the domestic leg is concerned, might be sort of replaced by the official dollars or the stable coins.
It's going to bring in a massive wave of efficiency over time. However, like you rightly pointed out, any sort of monetary system is going to have its pros and cons, and we're always going to constantly innovate. Back, like let's say in the 17th century, nobody would have thought that, okay, we're going to be experiencing this phase of rapid development where within a minute, I can just send across money across the world. So I think it's a very exciting time for us as access to network, internet, etc. is becoming evolved at a rapid pace.
Absolutely.
And speaking about, revolutionary concepts, especially in finance, another topic which I wanted to get your opinion on is, can a concept like universal basic income or universal basic services be successfully implemented in a country as populous as India?
See, the talk about or the case for the universal basic income is made basically by two arguments. One argument is that there is a lot of unemployment or job loss, which the digital revolution especially and the automation earlier would lead to. If you can produce all the goods and services by using, let us say, 10% or 20% of the labor, then the 100%. So the 80% need to get income from somewhere to live a good life. And therefore, if this argument that as the technology advances, as the production systems becomes more and more efficient, you might not need most of the people to be to produce. That is the argument. I don't think this is going to happen because there might be many more new sort of services and goods which might come up, which people may produce, which may enhance the global production and the consumption, as has happened in the industrial age, where people thought that with this now, there would be an enormous amount of unemployment. The evidence is very simple. 500 years back or 400 years back, roughly 90% of the people used to work in agriculture and related things.
Right.
Whereas today, globally, not more than 5% work. In many countries, less than 1% people work in agriculture. That is what is happening to industry now with all the automation. I talk about in the book, the industry going the agricultural way. And with the technology going to do this might. So this is one argument which people sort of employ for the need for a universal basic income. The second argument, which is brought in by the people with socialist bent of mind, is that it's the state's responsibility to give minimum income to everyone. Right. So whether you're poor or rich or whatever, the state should assure and provide that minimum income to everyone. And that is the state's responsibility. Some versions of that you can see in India, like to farmers, every farmer you provide the 6,000 rupees grant is under the PM Kisan. Or for that matter, you distribute 10 kg of rice or wheat today to every one of the 80 crore people of India. So these are the sort of somewhat smaller version of the UBI, Universal Basic Income. Right. But basically that's the state's, the government's responsibility. Now, these are the two arguments for the UBI. My own assessment suggests that both of them are flawed arguments. I don't see the world coming to an end with the digital technologies and the automotive technologies taking up most of the today's production work. But I see enormous expansion in digital space, the decentralized space, and many new studying for the sake of for developing knowledge, providing health services to everyone. Enormous expansion of travel in the industry, development of sports as an occupation rather than only for amateurish purposes. Right. Entertainment, producing contents. You can list so many things which are exploring seas, rivers, cleaning up environment, cleaning up pollution. There's enormous amount of so much of thing which we need to do, which we are not doing, and that would create a lot of jobs and works to my mind. Right. It may not be in the traditional manner of employer-employee relationship. It might be in different gig economy or otherwise. They would, to my mind, be a lot of activities to do for everyone, right? Right. And therefore, that is not to my mind. And as far as the second argument is concerned for the state, I believe the state has duty only to those who are incapable of earning their living. So if you are too old, if you are handicapped, you can't earn, that kind of people, and in many countries that's very large. For example, India also has about 5 crore such people. So that only the state need to take care rather than everyone. So I don't really subscribe to the UBI, and therefore I am more in favor of a nuanced UBI. Because I also believe that the income transfer is a better way rather than giving lots of subsidies and the assistance and delivering that through state mechanism more inefficiently. So, but that income, so universal in that sense should be defined to be the universe of those who can't really be taking care of themselves, not everyone.
Beautifully put. You hit the point on I think the main issue is not that we all don't have the same outcome. It's just the access to opportunities that must be addressed. And you beautifully explained that concept. Thank you for that. Moving from these futuristic concepts, let's come down to some of the issues that India is facing right now, especially the globe is facing right now, is that with inflation. You recently wrote an op-ed in Economic Times addressing this topic. And in that article, you highlight how RBI, in its recent Monetary Policy Committee meeting, projected that the GDP growth for India in the second half of 22-23 is going to be about 4%. Additionally, the concoction of supply chain disruptions, global geopolitical issues, and the release of this pent-up demand due to COVID is causing increasing levels of inflation. So slowing GDP growth plus rising levels of inflation, should we be worried about facing something like stagflation going forward?
I think any policymaker would do well to keep his or her feet on the ground and eyes firmly focused on what is happening in the economy. I don't think we should live in a make-believe world. We should live, and most importantly, the policymakers should live in that world which is real and which is what is happening in front of your eyes. And I think it's a real thing that there is danger to the growth in India. The fact that the RBI, which you quoted, and it's there in the RBI's monetary policy statement, that the RBI expects the second half, the third quarter growth to be 4.1%, and the fourth quarter growth to be only 4%. Now, 4% growth for a year, for a half year, is too low. I don't think that can lift India out of poverty, or that can serve our ambition of growing reasonably well, or achieving anything of this $10 trillion dream which I talk about. So while growth slowing down, we should go into the reasons why growth is slowing down, take care. And at the same time, this inflation now. So inflation, for various reasons, you cited supply side constraints, the supply getting disrupted by Russia-Ukraine war, the cost of money rising all over the world now with all the central banks raising rates of interest. US is already at about 3%, 10 years paper. So all these will force. Oil price is too high, gas, fertilizer, all of these prices are simply rising very fast to be for anybody's comfort. So unless we handle the situation well, we adopt policies which take care of the growth, and also adopt the policies which contain inflation. I don't think India would ever have negative growth except when you take decisions like complete lockdown, which happened in March 20. Other than that kind of senseless decision, if I may call, I don't think India would have negative growth ever, because we have a very dynamic set of people, very brainy people, very hardworking people. You have seen, you have studied in America. So in American system today, there's so many CEOs, so many finance, IT professionals, and they are contributing to American growth and all. They're contributing to growth elsewhere. So the inherent dynamism of our people will make sure that we will grow 3, 4, 5% minimum. But the contribution which should come from policy, the right kind of policy, is the additional element which is what is needed. So I think the danger is really there, but at the same time, if we adopt the right kind of policy framework and encourage the Indian economy and the dynamic Indian people to do work, I think we will not only stop off the potential stagflation, but we'll be able to resume higher growth rates.
Right, right. And, alongside inflation, another topic that's been thankfully been recognized by all nations is that of climate change. So slightly switching gears a little bit, a topic to highlight is of climate change, and the cogent and actionable policy reform recommendations that you provide in the book with regard to ESG and climate change are remarkable. So let's unpack a few of them. You shed some light actually on the current state of the MOEF NCC and why it might need a sort of revamping in terms of basic orientation and purpose. Can you explain that a little bit for the audience?
So I talk about the environmental transition as one of the 5 major transitions which Indian economy need. And that is what you picked up beside the digital, the private sector transition, the tax transition, the redistribution scheme. So the important transition here is the environmental transition. And what does that environmental transition means? Number one, I think we need to recognize that globally, and there is a lot of recognition which is happening very fast, and I think the younger generation is recognizing that much better than the older one. Is that the system of production which we have created in the industrial society to convert the agricultural commodities and the natural minerals and metals by using the fossil fuel is at the root of our pollution problem. It's at the root of our carbon problem. That recognition is required. Sometimes we don't accept it. We argue in terms of more of the morality or the ethics of it, that you did more of the damage earlier and therefore you should contribute to the cleanup. And that is where the MOEF is today sort of locked in. The MOEF is locked into the pollution problem, the carbon problem, but it's not sort of into the solution still. So the transformation I talk about is to turn the MOEF or any other sort of mechanism in the government from being a sort of adjudicator of the past and trying to contain the activity of the industrial world by sort of following the process of either not granting the approval for setting up industrial factories, etc., to something which then. So to my mind, if let us say MOEF is made to focus. Let us say India selects 5 major pollutants besides carbon. So it can be NOx, it can be SOx, it can be any other of the major pollutants. And and then the MOEF is focused on sort of making policies and programs to ensure that their production is reduced in the economy. And additionally, it also undertakes a program to sequester the pollution and the carbon and put that back into the earth or elsewhere. Then it will serve the more positive agenda. That is what I talk. I also talk about in the taxation system that for serving the cause of environment, we will need to change the taxation system. Today we tax the positive value creation. Nothing wrong with that, because government need to get tax revenues to do the public goods and services function. So whatever value the enterprises add, a part of that is added as value-added tax, and that tax goes to the government for that, right? But we don't sort of deal with the negative value add. And the negative value add is the carbon, the pollutants and all. So if we can identify these and then make like the positive value add balance sheet, if we have a negative value add, whoever adds value also pays tax on that, right? So if we can have a system like this of the environmental taxation, we can alter the incentives completely between those industries which use polluting fossil fuels and those industries which produce the same thing by not using that, right? So, for example, solar or the wind will stand to benefit in much way instead of coal, gas, and otherwise. Likewise, the fertilizers which are industrially produced by using urea and other kind of things, in comparison to the natural fertilizers, etc., would stand to lose. And it's not to make sure that you ban these, because if you ban the power production by the fossil fuel, you might create a situation which where you may not be able to meet the society's requirement or the economy's requirement of power. Likewise, you may not be able to meet the fertilizer requirement of the industry and the people. But the incentives change would make sure that as we go along, more and more is produced in an environmentally sustainable way, and less is produced. And over a period of time, you would have the whole thing cleaned up. So that is what I think the MOEF, or for that matter, the entire environmental management in the country needs to be changed quite a lot.
Sort of repurposing from being so process oriented into being very specific in its goal setting, and also recognizing the fact that actions need to have consequences, and sort of introducing that concept in how you go about taxation. That was very well explained. Thank you.
Thank you.
So another one of the main structural problems you identify, which I just want to go over before we come to the final question of this conversation, is that of education reforms. So you beautifully identify in your book that the Indian educational system has had a focus on the higher education for the first 20 years after independence. And this kind of led for the primary education system being neglected. Could you elaborate your thoughts on this and what the consequences of doing this were?
So I don't think there is anything wrong in focusing on the higher education, right? But it should not be neglecting the primary education. The education which we, most of the time we don't define what the education is, what we are talking about. But if we mean the education to be sort of imbibing or familiarizing, providing the knowledge about yourself, your society, your world to the people, so it all includes the knowledge and information about self, our society, and the world. That takes place in primary education space, because that is where the child is growing up, and he has the necessary wherewithal. He has a body we talked about, and he has a brain which did not have anything at that stage. So a lot of these things are required to be put into that brain. So that education is so essential that education, if ignored, you will not produce people who can absorb or imbibe higher education as well.
Right.
And therefore, my argument is that both higher as well as higher includes technical, and the primary education is important. But in the book, the more important point which I make in the context of education and in the context of Indian education system is that we made a very wrong policy choice of treating education as a charitable activity. And that has led to, number one, restrained supply or restricted supply of the educational services. We need many more doctors, but we don't have enough medical colleges because government cannot provide for all. They don't have that kind of resources. And the charitable institutions in private sector have gone out of that education business because they can't afford so much of the cost of this. And whoever has remained is remained with for ulterior for different. I'll come to that a little later. So the absence of sort of profitable or for-profit kind of element in education has restrained the supply. I don't see any reason why, except for the primary education, which has to be universal, which has to be for everyone, the technical education, the higher education, the medical education need to be considered as a charitable activity. All these actually involve imparting these skills and knowledge which are useful for earning the living and as a professional or as a skilled person. And anything which invests you, which makes you better or more capable of earning living or income, is as commercial or as for profit as making machines or technology is. So if we can for the technology, non-human technology, let me put it, we treat that as profitable activity. But for the human technology creation, we think that this is charitable only. Now that is more from the heart rather than from the mind, and therefore this policy has led to poor outcome. The standard of education funded from the public resources is poor. The supply is restricted, and in the private, the education has gone into the hands of goons and many people with who have very poor moral standards. They would take payments, capitation fees, otherwise. So I think the big reforms in education which we need to do is to free up the education, especially the technical, medical, and the higher education from the chains of being only charitable activity. That's what I argue.
And I think as you were talking about this, another point which I wanted to augment, in addition to education, another thing that's been changing in India as such is there's been a rapid percolation of gig-based economy and alternate forms of careers. So what are some of the policy steps that can be taken to build a more inclusive labor force by 2035, specifically considering this change in dynamic in the country?
So I have a chapter on labor reforms in the book. And my sense is that today's labor laws and the architecture is 200 years old architecture. It doesn't reflect the needs and concerns of the current economy. More and more economy is becoming digital. More and more economy is becoming a gig economy. People are increasingly leaving jobs to set up their, because they have skills, they have abilities which they can provide to more number of employers rather than only one or so. And that is reflected universally in workers' participation rates going down all over the world. And the proportion of the gig workers or the producers is increasing very, very fast. And this trend is going to accentuate as we go along. Therefore, we don't have the factories of the yore, the satanic factories, as Gandhi used to call it. We don't have very many hazardous places. And therefore, I think we need to take a very drastic reform step here in the labor side. you junk all the labor laws, and there are hundreds of them in the country. The consolidation which took place talks about only 29 labor laws, and replace them with only 2 laws, which I have argued in the book. Number 1, only a hazardous workplace regulation act. You free up anything. You just don't worry. The government need not worry about any workplace which is not hazardous. And expand the definition of workplaces. So you have cyber workplaces, you have physical workplaces, you're working from home, you're working from factories, you're working from your cars. So the workplace itself has become a much different concept than what it is. And so everyone who is producing something should state that what is the workplace he or she is using, and that's all. And if it comes within the definition of hazardous, then only the government and the agency should step in to regulate it. Otherwise, it just file and forget kind of arrangement which is there. And if you have a file and forget concept, I don't think anybody would have a problem in intimating what kind of work space he or she is working. And then second, that the government's concern should be limited only to the fact that the labor is not exploited in terms of wages. So the minimum wage is what should be the government's concern. One minimum wage is specified. In fact, government should have a backstop arrangement that if you don't get the minimum wages elsewhere, we have programs like Narega and others where you can come and work and take the minimum wage. So that sets the floor both for the employers. If they want to get people, they have to pay at least that much minimum. Otherwise, you have a fallback option. But other than these two, I don't think any law is required. We should simply abolish. This kind of preparedness for the future is what is, I think, what can set India apart from others and pave the way, what we talked about a little while earlier, the reforms which are needed to sort of kickstart and give impetus to the higher growth in the country.
Right. The secret is keeping it simple.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this was absolutely a wonderful discussion. We spoke about everything from concepts like UBI to DeFi to problems like climate change and inflation to getting your views on education and labor reforms. Now, as a final question, it would be great to hear your take on what you think the 3 big mega trends are in the coming decade.
So I think it's so clearly visible, right? One trend to my mind is that the world, unlike what you hear from some time, world is getting increasingly more globalized. So whether you in terms of working, so today people work anywhere in the world, or in terms of financial system or transfers or technological integration, social media, whatever you take it. Despite some countries following more nationalistic policies and things like that, I think the journey towards making the world a single home for the Homo sapiens, or in that sense, a single country, not necessarily in terms of administrative or political unit, but in terms of a cultural and economic entity is very much going to be there in times to come. So that's what I think is one of the major mega trend which I see. The second one is, we talked about the digital transformation of everything. So services, to my mind, are where you use intelligence. Intelligence is data, artificial intelligence is data-based, and more of the intelligence related work can be done much better and more efficiently and in the digital space. So I see the digitalization of almost everything happening. Of course, the food you eat or the clothes you wear perhaps cannot be digital, and therefore those will be produced in agriculture, in factories and elsewhere. But at the same time, more and more of those processes would also be digitalized. So how do you do agriculture? How do you sort of plan the inputs? How do you then take out your products, assemble them, pack them, transport them, sell them? There's a lot of digitalization which is going to happen. So I think digitalization of everything possible is the second major trend. The third major trend to my mind is that the earth or the world is going to be environmentally clean and wholesome. Humanity has increasingly realized this to be a problem, and it has brain and the ability to sort of change that. And I think in times to come, this transition from fossils to non-fossil fossils, increasingly smaller and smaller use of minerals and materials, and therefore, I don't know, but 100 years from now, if you don't mine anything in the world, it would not be something out of the world. You may perhaps not mine anything, not any fossil fuel, not any other mineral, because whatever you perhaps need might already be on the, so you can reuse and things like that. And if you can tie that up with the increasing global population stabilization, I think the clean and green and the wholesome climate for everyone is going to be there.
So digitization, globalization, and hopefully hoping for a clean, green home to live in. So beautifully summarized. With that, thank you so much for joining me today. It was absolutely brilliant. First reading your book and then discussing it with you. I must say the $10 trillion dream, you have a knack for breaking down complex ideas and presenting them to the audience in a simple way that anybody can pick up this book and understand what India is facing and how we can visualize the dream into a reality. So thank you so much. It was amazing having you on the show. Thank you.
Thank you, Prarthana. I must also compliment you for reading this big book. It's not a small one, so 700 pages, and then absorbing it, and then thinking of questions and also reaching out to me, and then arranging this extremely stimulating and good session. I'm very happy to be on your show. And I wish you all well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.